So we aren't done with interfaces. But we're going to talk about a different kind of interface, which is the user interface. So how would a programming interface be different from a user interface? So given a class like this, here's a class. This is its programming interface. And I'm saying it's a programming interface because it's an interface used by programmers. Right? So a programmer that wants to use this class can use this interface to build on this class. And the user interface would be the interface. How would you formally define a user interface? We all use this term. Sorry, say it. And how would you define it? Which user? The end user. So it's the interface between the end user and the class. Okay? So programming interface is an interface between two classes written by programmers. And user interface is the interface that is between the end user and a particular class. Okay? And it might be a GUI, or your basic console-based I/O may also be an example of an interface. Okay? So it's some kind of screen-based or even maybe haptic, who knows what. Okay? So in general, when you define a class, you have to implement this. You have to define the class, you have to go and provide its interface, and you have to sometimes also, when it's going to be used interactively, as in your project, define its user interface. Okay? And to define its user interface, you have to write some extra code that is between the end user and the class. Okay, so that code is going to use the programming interface to change the objects of that class, and it's going to talk to the user to figure out how to change it. The user is not going and talking in terms of get height or get weight. The user is using some other language, which might be the GUI language or a console-based user interface. Okay. So, in terms of the car analogy, can you see what that might mean? It might be a little bit of a stretch, but let's see. So a car has, operations to brake and accelerate. That's a programming interface. And we tend to, as users, often use that interface directly. But are there times when we move around in the car when we don't directly use that interface, but use some other interface? We're not necessarily driving, we are going somewhere. So if we are not necessarily driving, we're going somewhere where we decide where we go, who's driving? Somebody else. Okay? So that somebody else is translating between our instructions, which say go here, to, steer, accelerate, brake, or whatever. Okay? So we can imagine the user interface to be like a chauffeur, and that's speaking a different. You speak in the language you understand, which is the more end user language. You don't get into the nitty-gritty of braking and accelerating and so forth. Okay? So that's just an analogy, and that means that when you write a class or when you get a car and the end user doesn't drive, the end user has to first go and buy a car, or and somebody has to build a factory for the car the person wants, and then the chauffeur has to be trained to basically translate between the end user and the car. Okay, so the user interface really is a piece of code that translates between what the end user says and the programming interface of the class. Okay? So, like I said, that's more work. So code implementing UI translates user actions to methods. So, in general, you're going to define some service, like a BMI spreadsheet, which just does the computation with the programming interface. You're going to build some user interface code also. And the user interface code will be not written from scratch. It will be built on some type of library like AWT, Swing, or whatever. Now, how how much work do you think the user interface code is in comparison to the service code? Is the service code much larger? Is the user interface code much larger? Or, as in the picture here, about the same? How many for much larger program service code? Nobody? Much larger user interface code? How many of you have built interactive applications? You, yeah. But in general, on average, in your experience. You've done that both. So this is a question that's of great interest to researchers. And way back in 78, when most user interfaces were these console-based user interfaces, which means you read input, you produced output, you didn't really, from the console, you didn't really create GUIs. So you use things like printline and scan. The UI code was, they found that on average, there was an IBM survey, was average, about the same, on average. Okay? And what do you think happened when toolkits got created? When it got created? Okay? The same thing. Okay? Still 50%. Now the UI is everything is much bigger. The GUI is much more complicated, but the toolkit is also bigger. So it's still about 50% of your code, according to some studies. Okay? And why am I talking about this here in your class? Well, you don't want to just write functions and you call functions. You want to create an interesting project. Okay? And that project has a GUI. And we'd like to go in and find ways to minimize the code you write for the GUI. Okay? So given that, wouldn't it be nice if this code that we've got is not application specific? If some magic tool existed that, given your programming interface, automatically created the user interface from that. Okay? And that would ease your task. Because then you can just focus on the programming interfaces and you don't have to get into the details of GUIs. Okay? And let's see whether such a tool is possible. And let's do work bottom up. So for this particular programming interface or this class, what kind of GUI do you expect? Would you want? I mean, there's many GUIs possible, but just give me the first thing that comes to your head. This is a class that lets you go and compute your BMI based on your height and weight. Okay? So what kind of GUI might you expect here? Yeah? 2 fields for? And then, how do I say my BMI?
Submit, and then it returns or enter.
And it returns some kind of pop-up value?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? That's certainly a valid user interface. Okay, that's valid. How about this? A little better, I think. So you have 3 fields. Okay? And one field is always showing you the value. You don't have to go and get a pop-up value and dismiss it. Okay? Now, if I was to build, and, based on, the answers I got, or I didn't get, maybe there was not many other alternatives here. So, can you imagine generating this automatically by a generic tool that doesn't understand BMI spreadsheets, but just looks at your programming interface and just generates this user interface? As it turns out, this was built by a generic tool. That's the tool object editor that you guys might have heard of. So what general rules could it have used to create this UI from this programming interface? Yeah. Okay, so it would make input fields for the properties with getters or setters. Input means you can change. setters. And it will make read-only fields for properties that have no setters. Okay? Not too hard. So it looks at the getters and setters. Okay, that's why, these conventions of getters and setters are very important. Okay, because the tool's going to look at them now. Okay, and it goes and looks at get height and says, oh, I should create a height field, weight field, BMI field. Okay, and now what I would like is when I change the weight, it should automatically change the BMI. That's why I'm calling it a spreadsheet. You change the dependent values and the independent values, and the dependent values change. Now, an object editor will do that. So what are the rules it's following exactly? It goes through the class. It uses something called reflection. Okay, it doesn't really look at the source code. It uses some API that Java provides. It's called the reflection API. And from the reflection API, it goes and figures out what all the properties are. For each property, it goes and creates a field. And then how does it display the value of the field? It calls the getter for that property. Right? So that's fine. That's why we created, because now when I go and change weight from 71 to 77, what exactly will it do now? It'll call set weight. And then how do we get the new BMI value? Call get BMI. But how does it know to call get BMI and not get height or get weight? It doesn't know anything about BMI spreadsheet. It's a generic tool. It's the only read-only value. It could use that value. It could use that. But sometimes there are dependent values, interdependent values. The Cartesian coordinates depend on the polar coordinates, depend on the Cartesian coordinates. So what else could it do? It's got to update get BMI. It doesn't know it should call get BMI. So what could it just do? Sorry? Okay, could keep polling get BMI, or how does it know it should constantly poll get BMI? Because it knows when something has changed. It knows that this particular value got changed. You changed it through it. So the issue is not when values have changed. The issue is what values have changed. So you go and change a value, the setter gets changed, setter gets called, and now it's got to somehow, maybe call all of the getters. Okay? That's what exactly it does. Okay? So whenever you go and change, it'll go and call get height, get weight, get BMI, and whichever has changed will get updated. That's the safest technique, most general technique. Okay? So that's what I'm telling you. Any questions on this? And you could verify this by putting print statements. Okay? You could go and, in your get BMI, put a little debugging statement to verify that this behavior actually happens. And you can say get height call, set height call, get weight call, and so forth. And so these are your debugging output. This is not your real output, but your debugging output. And you kind of see that happen, right? Get height called in the beginning to display the first property. Get weight called. Get BMI called. This is kind of confusing. The get weight gets called again, but then after that, set weight gets called. Then get height gets called, get weight gets called, get BMI gets called. Okay, so after set weight is called, all of these getter methods are called. And somehow, for some reason, this get weight method is called before set weight. And anybody want to guess why that happened? And it's not just a bug. So the get weight method got called twice, but not get height. Yeah. because I set the value. And yes, so that's a clue. That weight is the property I changed. So the property, before I change the property, I go and read its value. And I'm not sure I understood your answer completely. Why did I read the value before setting it? Okay, but that's a good clue. So for some reason, whatever value you change, you go and retrieve first. Okay, and you might want to do that because you're about to change a value, and before you change the value, you want to just record what was the old value. Sorry? So you could undo it. Okay? So Object Editor has a built-in undo facility, and that's why I did that. Okay? And if you implement your own undo, that's the kind of thing you have to do. So that's why I want to emphasize that. Okay? So this is what happens when you load the value. This is when you change the weight, and this is this is for the undo redo mechanism in Object Editor. Okay, let's start. Questions? So you guys have all received grades on your first assignment. You received your points, but you've not received any feedback. If you have full points, that's not an issue at all. But if you don't have full points, that obviously may be of concern to you if you don't think the points match what you should have got. So the TA sent a message saying that if you have questions, please come to office hours, and you're welcome to do that. Of course, that means you have to trudge to an office and put some energy into that. So many of you have been sending emails instead, which is fine. And you've been getting replies to those emails. Except that this help alias that we have set up, we used to set it up in the department, but the department is not outsourcing to Google. And initially, it won't let you send messages if you're not in the CS domain. So a lot of your messages weren't getting through, so we fixed that. And now your messages get through, but it is very eager about, classifying them as spam. So many of these messages are not reaching us, actually. And I just discovered that this morning. So I've asked for the spam filter to be taken out. So hopefully that won't be a problem. But in general, a couple of things. So we have 3 ways of communicating with us: Piazza, help, and office hours. And as I've always said, that please use Piazza for questions about general questions, right? And it's great. You guys are just amazing in the way you help each other out. And so we don't even have to do any work, actually. But if you don't get a reply to your Piazza post within a couple of days, send an email. And if you don't get an answer to your email within a day or two, please come to office hours or send email again. Okay, so don't give up. Okay, everybody is overwhelmed with messages coming in, so maybe we didn't see the message, or as I've discovered, maybe we didn't even receive the message. Okay, and questions about grades, which are very personal, those you shouldn't. I want you to use Piazza for everything else, for general questions, but for grades that are specific to you, it's best not to use Piazza and just send mail to the help alias, or come talk to us in office hours. Okay, there's lots of office hours, so you shouldn't have any issues coming to office hours. And again, I think you should be getting back your emails replies pretty promptly too. Okay, and don't hesitate. Don't say, it's only a couple of points, I won't bother the TAs. If you think you lost even 2 points unfairly, complain. And I haven't quite figured out how they graded. We have a meeting this afternoon, so I'll figure it out a little bit better. But there was some automation that used and some manual grading. And so, whenever there's automation, you have to be very distrustful. So mistakes can easily be made. And I know at least 1 or 2 of you just used a format that the program couldn't understand. And that's why you might have lost points. Okay? Other questions? Yeah. So the office hours were I think, the messages were sent in Piazza also, but the course page has the office hours. And as they change, I sometimes don't get a chance to edit it. but they do send the message to Piazza and say, okay, this is what's happened. So that's going to hold the latest information, but they're posted on the course page. Okay, I know the course page is a pretty long page, but they're there. Okay, right at the beginning. Other things? And you can send mail. I mean, if you don't want to go and trek all the way there, send mail saying, what happened, and I've seen some of those emails, and it was some misunderstanding, and it was corrected very quickly. Okay. Other things? Okay, so in recitation, you guys use this tool, Object Editor, okay, which is going to be actually an aid in your testing your program, in your creating your user interfaces, the ultimate user interface for your project, and also a tool for grading. Okay, because what it does is it goes and analyzes your program, and if your program follows certain rules, then it does certain things. And think about it this way, that you guys are trying to build big programs. Big programs generally involve multiple people. Whenever there are multiple people involved, you have to have some rules for each other. Okay? And the difference here is that you're programming alone, but there's a collaborator there, Object Editor, which is trying to understand what you did. And so you have to go and follow certain rules so that it can understand. Okay? So Object Editor will force you to actually follow certain rules that are popular in computer science. Okay? And one of these rules had to do with properties and beans, that if you are very careful about how you define properties, then Object Editor will go and find the properties for you and display them. Okay? So we saw this BMI spreadsheet class earlier, and it had a get height and a set height. So it had these three properties. And BMI happened to be a read-only property, so it was not editable. So this box that it created was not editable by the user. So visually, one can go and see what you did in your program based on the interface it created. Okay. So what you did was you set a new BMI spreadsheet, and then you said object editor dot display edit. You say edit because the user can actually edit the editable properties. BMI spreadsheet, and it will go and analyze your program and create this user interface. Okay, and you guys actually in your recitation did another problem, so you see the general principles working here. And we even saw the rules last time on how the properties are displayed, what happens exactly when you edit a property. Okay, Ashley?
How did you get the BMI to display if it's not up there, like in the code?
So see here, I've got a main class here, main method. Okay, so this is division of labor. The main class is instantiating a BMI spreadsheet class, which we can't see right now.
Okay.
And it's just saying, so some of you are having trouble with understanding this class cooperation thing. Okay, so you've got a class that you've defined, and another class uses it. That's the whole point of your second assignment. It's part of the point of your second assignment that you have a bean class and a main class. Okay, that's exactly what I'm doing here. I've got a main class and a bean class. And these properties are defined in this class, the one I'm editing, not the class that is actually calling the editor. Okay, that's just a main class with a main method. Okay? More questions? Okay, now here's an interesting thing. I did object-editor.edit BMI spreadsheet. Okay? I instantiated a BMI spreadsheet without any arguments. So I have not initialized its variables. And I say, that's okay, I'm going to edit the BMI spreadsheet, and then I'm going to go and call set weight and set height. Okay? Even though I have called set weight and set height, what I see here is just 0, 0. So why do you think that has happened?
Has the program not gotten to those ones?
Has the program not gotten to those lines of code yet? So it's possible that I put a little breakpoint right after object-editor.edit, and I'm still at that breakpoint, and I haven't displayed it. Okay? That's one possibility, but actually it has run. Okay, so I didn't put any breakpoint here. Yeah.
Well, the edit method doesn't create a new thread for the new window, then it won't even get to those lines until you close the edit
Okay, so the question is, you know, when you guys did scanner.nextLine waited until the user went and put some values in. Okay? So that's what's called a blocking call, that it blocks the program till some interesting event happens. So the issue is ObjectEditor.edit a blocking call? Okay? And as it turns out, it's not. It merrily continues right after that saying, it's been displayed, and let me execute the rest of the code. Okay? So I didn't put a breakpoint, which would make it block. I haven't, the edit method is not a blocking call. Yeah. You did not tell Object Editor to update. When does Object Editor know to update? Whenever you go, when you are dealing with Object Editor and you go and edit the height property and you hit return, Object Editor knows, oh, you went and entered a new value. And because you entered a new value, it goes and refreshes it calls all the getters and refreshes all the values. Okay? So it does what's called a brute force approach. You know, it's not smart enough to know what you changed, so it just uses pure force and says, I'll just update everything, just in case something changed. But it has to be triggered. It has to be told something interesting has happened. Object Editor is not tied to the compiler. So it's not as if after every set height method call, some message is sent to Object Editor saying, hey, update your value. Okay, the program is just executing autonomously. It's just another object. So you did not tell Object Editor to update. Okay? So how could we fix this problem? If we were designing Object Editor, we can't be tied to the compiler. We don't want for the compiler to have to know about all the objects that we might create. So, yeah.
Would calling the edit update the values?
So I go and say, edit ABMISPREADSHEET one more time. That would be, basically tell it to do something. So are you saying just call edit or call edit ABMISPREADSHEET? Okay. So I could have that syntax, ObjectEditor.edit ABMISPREADSHEET, and what do you think that's not what really happens. What do you think might happen actually? What's another intuitive explanation for that call? It'll create another window with ABMISPREADSHEET. You can use either window to do it. But you're on the right track. You want to go and somehow go and say, please update this window. The window you created for this one. Okay? Somehow the programmer has to go and name that window and say window dot, and what would be a good name to go and ask it to update? Update, or what is something you see in the GUIs? Refresh. Okay? So we'll go so setters are not called through Object Editor. So this setter was called through the program, not Object Editor, so it did not know that it should go and update. Whereas when you go and edit the height field, the setter is called through Object Editor, so it updates. But it has to refresh. That is the aspiration. So what we do is we return to you the frame or window Object Editor created when you called ObjectEditor.edit. Okay? And I can just say OE frame.refresh. Okay? Yeah.
So did you just add those lines of code to the original?
Yeah, so I went in basically in Java you have these methods that can return values and methods that don't return values. Methods that don't return values are typed as void. The ones that return values are typed with some name other than void. Okay?
Okay, this is a different class though, right?
Same class, Object Editor. It's not even a class. We are saying Object Editor.edit, an instance of the same class. The same line, edit is really a function or a value that returns, a method returns a value. In Java, when you call a function, you may do nothing with its value. In which case you call it like a procedure. You just go and don't assign the value to any variable. What I did now was assign it to a variable, which must mean that I should know how to type the variable. Okay? In Java, there are things called frames. Windows are called frames. And we are calling this an OE frame because it's a frame created by Object Editor. Okay, that's why the name is. And because it's something created with the Object Editor, we can add another method to it, which is refresh, and it'll go and basically call all the getter methods at that point and redisplay the whole object.
So if you had updated height and weight in the actual Object Editor, that would do it automatically. But if you do it in the program with the setters, then you have to follow it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you don't really call set height and set weight from the program in the object editor. The user goes and enters. The user goes and says, okay, I'm going to change the height. And object editor says, you just hit return. So now I will go and take your text, convert that into a double, because I know height is of type double. And then I'm going to call set height with the double argument. And it knows, since it calls set height, it knows set height was, something changed. So it updates. Okay?
And those initial values, like when they were zeros, that comes from the constructor?
Yes, that comes from Java. Java basically says if you don't initialize any variables, I'll set them to 0.
Assuming BMI is, okay, never mind, I missed that it actually updated.
Yeah, it updated. It called all the getter methods. Okay, so again, these are rules. I mean, you can have multiple sets of rules. There's nothing sacred about these rules, except there are rules. If you're going to cooperate with somebody else, you have to follow the rules. Okay, that's sort of, that's the essence of writing big programs. Now, if you put this refresh in, you'll get a little warning from Object Editor saying, you weren't very informative when you said update. You just said refresh. So I had to call all the get methods. You could be smarter and tell me exactly what changed, but you weren't. Okay? And it says, look, it's possible that you don't know how to be so smart, so that's okay. But when you do learn these things, don't force me to call all the get methods. So for now, you don't know how to announce these property events. So ignore this message and say, okay, someday I will know enough to avoid this message. But for now, you will get this message and it's okay. Okay? So later we will learn better ways to refresh. Okay, I'm making things much more interesting now. Okay. So what do? I create a new instance of a BMI spreadsheet. Again, I use the null constructor. Okay. I call set height and set weight before I call edit. So object editor has these two values. I edit the BMI spreadsheet. Then I call sleep 5000. Anybody want to? I think we saw this in the first day, but what do you think the sleep call might be doing? It's a blocking call. Okay. Just like our scanner.nextLine was a blocking call. Scanner.nextLine blocked you until the user entered some value. Now it blocks the program for certain time units. So you're setting an alarm. Okay, and how many seconds do you think this is? Okay, so it goes down to the millisecond level, and it says, okay, 5,000 milliseconds. Okay, then I go and say, select whatever that might mean, weight. I set weight, I refresh, I sleep, and I go through this process again. I set, I refresh, and I could keep calling select again. I do keep calling select again. So forget the select call for right now. What do you think I'm trying to do here? Change the value through the program rather than the user. And I'm calling it a demoing. So would this be useful demoing? It refreshes correctly and it makes you wait. It makes somebody observing. It gives them enough time to go and see the value. Okay? So in your first assignment, in your second assignment, and even in your third assignment, you have to submit screenshots, right? So what you have to do is feed some values, take a screenshot, and give a bunch of static screenshots to show how your program behaves. Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to do that? You put something like this in your main method, you animate the behavior of the program, and the screenshots just come for the TA, but they weren't generated by you, they were generated by the program. They weren't done manually. Okay? So that's what the goal is. That if I didn't put the sleep call, you'll just see the final value. The human being will just see the final value. So that didn't give you enough. It'll just see one screen. Now we create a video essentially. And we are just giving enough time, so that the person can see. Okay? So this is what we'll do from now onwards. That rather than you laboriously going and creating screenshots, you just let it generate the screenshot for the TA.
So the sleep method here, like, just kind of doesn't reset it, right? Like refresh, kind of like.
Yeah, refresh says update. Sleep just says let the person see. Give them time before you go and update because the program is very fast.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that's why it says stop phone.
Yeah. So it's really,
What's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, and then,
Yeah.
Okay.
And yes, exactly. Okay. And anybody want to guess what the select call is doing? Or might do?
chooses which fields, like it's not telling object editor to update all fields.
Oh, so you're saying maybe I'm being smart finally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. Anybody else want to guess? Yeah.
Maybe like highlight the box.
It highlights the box. Okay, it says, look, please see the weight now. So yeah, you can select the weight, or you can. So it basically tells the person, look at the weight, and I'm going to change the weight. Okay, so please go and observe what value I'm changing, and I'm about to change height. So please go observe the height and see what value it changes to, so the person knows what to look at in the screen, because otherwise they don't know what you're trying to do. Okay. And other questions? Okay. So thread support dot sleep, I should say. I shouldn't say thread support. Thread support dot sleep. The sleep got deleted. Makes the program wait for a specified number of milliseconds. Again, there are some calls that make you block. Sometimes some calls that do not make you block. Print line doesn't really make you block. But scanner dot next line does make you block, and this is a blocking call that just unblocks based on time passing. And if you want to just see what happens with this, there's a link to make that happen. Okay. So as I said that you are now dealing with another agent. This agent happens to be a tool rather than a human being, and you have to follow the rules properly. And, with a human being, you can say, oh, yeah, if I went and made some lowercase thing uppercase, maybe they'll understand. Or if I went and use some synonym for a word, they'll understand. And Object Editor tries to do some of those things, but it's compared to human beings, it's a stupid program, right? So you have to be a little bit more careful about the rules. So these rules I gave you for getters and setters have to be followed literally. Otherwise, Object Editor will get very confused. Okay? So as I said, these conventions are for humans and tools. Most people motivate them as conventions for humans. But in fact, the Bean philosophy was created by Java for tools. They had something else called the Bean Builder that used it for a tool. And here we are just using it in another way. But the same rules, using them in another way. Okay? And the question is, you may not follow the rules properly. You may be doing what you think is reasonable and what probably is reasonable. And yet, Object Editor is not doing what you would like it to do. So here, only the height and weight properties got displayed, and neither of them is editable. And why did that happen? In general, a property would be not editable if it's missing what? A setter. Do we have a setter here? Yes, as human beings, we say there's a setter, but does it follow the setter rules of beans? No, right? You should have a set height and a set weight, and you can't just go and set multiple values. Yeah.
You have a set height. You have get weight set, get height, set height.
Oh, I do have a set height. So what happened here?
Should that just not be there, or
It should be get height. The argument is that you don't have a get height.
So, gotcha, got me too. Yes, I have a set height. Does it follow the convention? What's wrong? Yeah.
The type returned by the getter doesn't match the type taken by the setter.
Exactly. The types don't match. One is a double, one is an int. Set height takes as an argument an int. and get height returns a double. And when object editor goes to the properties, it first finds the getter, says, okay, these are the properties I have. Then for each of those properties, it sees whether a valid setter exists or not. And it does not find a valid setter there. Okay? So it's possible to make these errors. And if you don't get any error message, it'll be frustrating, right? So if you're a designer of object editor, how could you help the person with the errors? How could we help us, figure out what we did wrong? So what kind of error, when in your first assignment, second assignment, you guys are doing some error tolerance, right? You guys are saying, okay, if the user didn't enter a legal character, I'll just skip the character and go further. So it's good to have some kind of error tolerance. It's good to have some kind of error checking. And this is something you saw in your recitation. How could you go and tell object editor something so that it goes and finds these errors? Or what should you tell object editor so that it can find these errors? Supposing you see this and you don't see height or weight being editable, how could you talk to object editor and say, hey, what's wrong? Why is this not the case? How would you even express what you want? So what is your intention? Your intention is to create 2 editable properties. Right? That's your intention. And what happened was 2 read-only properties. So somehow you have to go and express your intention in some high-level terms. And object editor can go and say, oh, is that what you intended? Okay. Based on that goal, you haven't done what should have been done. Okay? And what kind of mechanism did you see in recitation to express your intention to object editor? You had to put some magic text in there, maybe. Annotation. So, can somebody define what an annotation is in general from your usage? Is it a comment?
It's like a frame, it's a standard guideline of what you're going to.
Sorry?
It's like a guideline of what you're going to follow, so that as you comment your code, it picks up those annotations and tells you what specifically the code does.
Okay, so it's some way of talking to another human being?
Sure.
Or another tool. Comments are a way for talking to another human being or another tool? Another human being.
Annotations
Are both. They're powerful mechanisms. Okay? And so can this start these errors? And yes, let's talk about annotations. That we'll start talking to object editor and saying, this is what I intend to do. Okay? And you also tell the human being what you're intending to do so that the human being knows what's going on. So with comments, you can do that also. But with annotations, that's something that a tool can also see. So annotation is a comment, except that it's typed firstly. Okay? So there is, you say at this kind of annotation, structure pattern. Okay? So I'm saying, and we'll see other kinds of annotations too. Okay? So an annotation is a type, and in fact, it's a class. It's just another class. Okay? So you're giving the class, and in that class, a method is called, and you're giving the arguments to the method. Okay? So you're saying, look, I'm following a pattern. I'm following the bean pattern, by the way, and we'll see there are other patterns also. Okay? And this is just a named constant. Okay? Structure pattern names is just some class with some named constant. And so it's a comment that is accessible to a tool, and it's accessible to a tool at runtime, at execution time. Okay, it's not just accessible to a compiler. It's accessible to also some other object that's trying to understand what you're doing. Okay? That means it's available to object editor. So basically this particular pattern here says, look, the class is following this particular pattern. So there are many patterns there. Actually, again, there's a typo here. I should say structure pattern, pattern name. Okay? And why pattern annotations? They're good documentation. They can help you catch errors. Can you guys see from an efficiency point of view why this may be useful? Would object editor somehow do less work if you told it more. Yeah.
Well, it would, presumably when it first starts looking at the data, it tries to match them to the patterns it knows.
Right.
Where if you tell it the pattern first off, it already knows the pattern you're looking for.
Right. Okay. So rather than going and, figuring out, so basically rather than searching for everything, it searches for specific things. Okay. And there are many patterns. It first goes and tries to figure out what pattern you're following. And it says, oh, you're following the bean pattern. That means I'll just try to use my bean pattern analysis engine. I won't use a list pattern analysis engine. Okay? So it basically makes it much more directed, and it just validates what you did rather than search for what you might have done. Okay? So it's a win-win situation. It means you need to do more work, but people will all tell you that add comments. This is at least as good as comment, if not better. It's not really more work. In fact, it's more structured. You know what kind of values to put here. You don't have to think too much and say, what should I document? How should I document? The template for the document is right there. Documentation is right there. Okay? And then, of course, it can give you errors and warning messages if you don't follow what you intended. Okay. So, is this annotation enough to go and point out what the problem was with height and weight? So here I've said I'm following the bean pattern. And I really meant to make them editable, but they're not editable. Is this information enough? This annotation is telling you I have at least one property. I'm a bean. You're a bean if you have at least one property. Do we have at least one property? Yes. It happens to be read-only, but a bean can have only read-only properties. Okay? So this is not enough. And now, and I kind of hinted before what kind of annotation you might have to identify the specific problems we have, but try to figure out your own language. Now, how would you go and what kind of annotation might you want to have to figure out why these two properties are not editable? Just become designers. Just, invent annotations now.
You could say it was a read-only property or something like that.
So you'll say, these are my read-only properties. And if you said height and weight are my read-only properties, it will validate that the height and weight are read-only. And then to make sure that height and weight are also editable, I should tell it what? That these are my read-only, these are my properties, and these happen to be editable. Okay? And again, that's good documentation. Somebody can just go and look up here and say, oh, these are the properties you have. And then they can verify whether your methods follow that or not. Okay? So that's exactly what we have. We go and say, here's one annotation that takes as an argument a string and tells you, which kind of pattern it is. Here's another kind of annotation that takes as an argument a array. Okay? And in that array, you put in all the properties you have. And you better go and, spell them correctly. And then you go and say, these are my editable properties. Okay? And now when you look at this class, you also understand very well what the class does without having to look through the code. Again, this is something you can even put in an interface. Okay? But in a class, you're becoming more specific about that particular class. Okay? And if you do this, now you can see that says, okay, you should have a setter with a header, public void set height double parameter name. Okay, it's telling you very specifically. So you can go and say, hang on, my setter is exactly that, and then you start verifying and you say, oh, I had an int instead. Okay? And I guess I removed so I don't know whether these error messages correspond to this class. Oh, so what's wrong? I got myself again. So what's wrong with the BMI? Yeah, we didn't even see this last time. Am I defining a BMI property here correctly? I don't have a get BMI. Even though you might think that, a function name could just be BMI value. So it says, please define a method called getBMI, and we actually have a method called BMI. Okay? So yeah, we never even saw why BMI was not being displayed. This was the reason it was not being displayed, because we just didn't have a getBMI. Okay? Questions? Yeah.
Should we use this on assignment 3?
You can put it, but I didn't require you because I didn't know how far I'll get in here. So assignment 3, whatever you've done till Thursday is what I required you to put in. But please, just for fun, do it. I am going to indicate an annotation later that I want you guys to put in, and I'll make that extra credit because I didn't quite tell you that stuff before Thursday. But that will help us in our grading. Okay? So, but I think it won't be a bad idea to go and put this stuff in. Okay? Yeah.
Is there a way to tell the program that, like, for example, this BMI that you have here is your, in annotation format, is your get?
Yeah, you can do that also. Okay, and the language becomes so complex that it's better for you to just go and say get BMI. Okay? So yes, there's ways to do that. And Object Editor has those, and to be honest, I've forgotten how to use that stuff. Okay, but I did put it at some point. Okay? Especially with Booleans, it becomes confusing. And with Booleans, you can either say is or get. So you can say is overweight or get overweight. And either one, Object Editor will follow. And so you can do all that stuff too. Other issues, questions? Okay, so this is just telling you that how it's looking at things. Okay, and one of the nice now in the previous picture, height was above weight. Here, weight is above height. Okay, and the order in which the properties appear doesn't really matter. Object Editor by default orders them. How do you think? Do you think it just tosses the coin, or what do you think it might be doing? Order it sees them, that's one way. Alphabetically. It goes and puts all the editable properties first, then all the read-only properties, and it orders each list alphabetically. Okay? But you may want it a different order, and a lot of students, even though it doesn't matter from the point of view of your points, a lot of students want control over that. So, why do you think weight got displayed above height? It goes and uses the order of the property names to also determine in what order it should display. Okay? And when you guys later do later projects, this might be important when you do graphics especially. Okay? Okay. Questions? And just to give you more practice with annotations and make you appreciate annotations even more. Annotations are pretty new in Java. You won't see them addressed in many textbooks. Here's another annotation. Here are two sets of annotation. Forget the tags annotation right now. I've got another slide to talk about those. Here's an explanation thing, which is just like a comment. It just says, this is what my class does. Okay? This is what my interface does. This is what my class does. So for the interface, I say, we are calculating BMI from height in meters and weight in kgs. Okay? All classes that implement that interface must follow these particular semantics. And it says in this particular class, yeah, I'm doing whatever my interface says, but I'm also storing the computed BMI value in a variable. I don't know whether I really do that in this particular class or not, but you can say I'm either computing the value or I'm storing it in a variable. So I'm giving it, I'm just explaining that. So this is a free-form comment. I could have put a comment and put an annotation. Because I made it an annotation, Object Editor can make use of it. Can you guys, yeah? So I'm going to ask you that question. So why do you think, what do you think Object Editor could do with such a comment? Use your imagination. It's going to display the object. It's creating a user interface. Have you guys seen user interfaces in which things get explained for you? If you want to understand something, what do you typically do? Click help or mouse over? Okay? That's one of those things that Microsoft invented. And it's interesting, so when they invented this, Microsoft was doing very well. So almost everybody there was a millionaire. So they were there just because they had nothing else to do. And there were a lot of fights on how to implement the feature because everybody had their own way of doing it, and people left the company saying, no, this is the way I want to do it. And so this was a pretty controversial feature and a very interesting feature that those guys created. But we really created tooltip text. We follow that principle. And here I'm creating the tooltip text for the property. So if you hover over the property, you can say that the weight is in kgs. If you hover over the class, it says, it gives the explanation for the class and the explanation given for the interface. Okay? So you see here, if you hover over just the whole class display, which is the whole display, it basically takes the class and it creates class explanation and the interface explanation, concatenates them and shows them both. If I hover over BMI, it goes through the annotation that you had for the get BMI and it goes and puts that in. Okay? Just for fun. So this is where you can explain your UI and you can see again the benefit. The real benefit I'm going to show you is of creating annotations rather than comments. And I guess one of the things that I'll say often is that many things that you think should be in comments can be changed into something that the program understands. Okay? Variable names, method names, okay? Annotations, they're all ways to formalize what you would put in an informal comment. Okay? Okay, now let's go to the tags thing. So I've gone and said, and I've got a tags annotation, and its argument is of type array. And can anybody see what these tags are trying to do? And you've seen this concept in many, many places, including Piazza. Right? So whenever you have to post something, Piazza forces you. Is it homework 1? Is it homework 2? Is it what? Okay, and I can't tell you how useful that is from our point of view. When we didn't have Piazza, people used to send messages, and they would take subject lines from some arbitrary message before and put in another topic in that same thread and really confuse us. Okay? And here now, it's very clear you're talking about homework 1, you're talking about homework 2. If you want to find all the announcements that have been made about a certain subject, you just search for it. Okay? So this is what we're doing. We are creating these, not only are we creating these, building these creative writings that we want to tag, we're also building these creative classes that we'd like to tag and say, in my case, I'm saying, look, this particular example illustrates annotations, spreadsheets, properties, interfaces, object editor. So I'm just telling you all these topics that this particular class pertains to. Now, this is an annotation I would like you guys to all put in your assignment 3 for extra credit. Okay? But please do it. It'll really help us. Okay? But I just can't force you at this point. Why do you think it's important from grading point of view? Search the program to find out which is your scanner bean, which is your number token class. I'm not forcing you guys to create the name using a particular name. Please be creative in your names. Okay? But just go and tell us, this happens to be my scanner bean, this happens to be my number token class, and so forth. And then we can search those classes and see whether you've got the right properties or not. In fact, we can instantiate those classes dynamically, we can set values, we can get values back, we can validate whether the get values correspond to the set values. In theory, we can do it, and actually, I've written some code this weekend that I believe should be working before your next assignment. So please do put these things in there. Okay, and for us to be able to find this, you have to use certain tags. Okay, so I will go and edit this assignment right after, before 5 o'clock or before 5 o'clock, and I'll tell you exactly what annotation to put for each kind of class. Okay? Because you can't be creative in your annotation names, otherwise we have the same issue. So you'll have to go and say, use a certain string, and we'll tell you exactly what string to put in for each of these kinds of classes. Okay? Questions? Okay. So we've seen Object Editor, and let's go and try to figure out, we saw that there was this point interface, and then this Cartesian point class that implements an interface, and we saw what Object Editor would do when a BMI spreadsheet instance is displayed. What do you think it should do when this Cartesian point instance is displayed? Based on what you know already, what would it do? When a BMI spreadsheet was displayed, it looked at the properties, it created a field for each property. So what would it do in this case? Read only X and Y and have two boxes for that? That's what the semantics are based on what I've said already. But what might you want instead? Sorry? Yeah. So there are two questions. What might you want instead of this particular point interface? Sure, I can go and add into the interface setters, in which case those properties will become settable. But what might, given this particular programming interface, what kind of user interface, what kind of alternative user interface might you want? Which means, what should I display? Something like this. And my axes are what now? The axes are kind of funny, right? Y going down. Okay, that's how the computer talks about Y. Okay, that's how pixels are ordered. That's how Java deals with it, and that's what. Okay, so each point is, as you know, when you go and say 5 or 10, it's basically, when you say 3, 2, it's 3 pixels in the X direction, on the right direction, and 2 pixels in the bottom direction. Okay, so it'll actually display that. Okay, and this is your way to get that UI that we saw on the first day. This is how you're going to get the various graphics objects, because Object Editor understands certain graphics classes. Okay, so this is what you would want. Now, what rules do you think it used to display this? It could have used innumerable number of rules, but what might be good rules that could tell Object Editor this happens to be a point? Word point, word Cartesian, that's good. And what else would it need to know? So what else would it constrain you? If you are going to define a point, you must have a class in which you've got the word point in it. You know, polar or Cartesian, both should be displayed as points. So let's not insist on Cartesian or polar. Okay? Cartesian was just a representation. It was that I'll have X and Y coordinates stored rather than the radius and angle. Okay? And so you are defining a point if you've got the word point in the interface, plus you have to have 2 properties for the X and Y, and they should be named in some way also, perhaps. X and Y. Okay, if you had this point interface with empty point interface, it couldn't do anything. If you had the point interface with height and weight, it wouldn't know what to do. But if you have a point interface with X and Y, it says, aha, that's a point. Okay? So you look at the names of the class and interface, but that gets to, that's too constraining. So it's much better to go and tell, and then the Object Editor has to search. It's much better to go and tell it, okay, I'm actually not only following the bean pattern, but I'm also going and following the point pattern. Okay, so I am following the bean pattern. I'm going to do properties, but these properties are going to follow a higher level pattern, which is the point pattern. And when you do that, it'll go and look for X and Y properties. Okay, so its class interface of class either has the string point in its name or it has the point annotation, and it has properties X and Y. And it can have, and the properties could be both read-only or editable, but it should have properties that are at least readable. And it can have additional properties. You can have angle, radius, that's fine. You're free to have those properties. If you have the X and Y properties, it'll display that as a point. Okay? Again, nothing very special about these rules, except that you have to have some rules, and these are the rules we follow. So that's my annotation here, and I guess I'm just repeating. Okay, so the question now is, so I'm displaying this thing as a point. Do you think you might actually want to know the exact value to the coordinates? You know, it's 3, 2. Would that be useful? Yeah. You could, excellent idea. You could have that as the tooltip with mouse over, and that's something the object editor actually does support. And if you want to see all the values at one time, you could also do the following. You could go and look at the tree view, okay? And if you do the tree view, you'll see the whole, you'll see all the properties textually in a tree view, okay? And you go and hit the tree view again, it'll just disappear. So from debugging point of view, you know, when you guys are trying to make sure that things are placed properly, this is extremely useful. Okay, both the tooltip and the and this particular structure is very useful. Okay, and you can. I think I've got a wrong interface. So you have to press. You have to hit tree again, not drawing, and it'll go and remove the view. Oh, sorry. If you do drawing, then you will see only tree. Okay. So you can dynamically get the drawing view, you can dynamically get the tree view, and here I'm actually, I've removed the drawing view and seen only the tree view. Okay, so these are just details that in case you're interested. And you can not only do this from the user interface, you can also in the program go and say hide drawing panel, show tree panel, and a lot of students like this idea of being able to remove the main. There's also something called show main panel, remove main panel. And so this is useful from just your point of view. From our point of view, you never have to use this. Okay, it's just that people do want this call, so I put this in. Another thing people often want to do is customize the size of the window, and you know, nothing mysterious or subtle here. You just go and say set size, set location, and if you, in general, if you use Eclipse, again this should be small f. If you use Eclipse and you say frame dot, it'll give you all the methods that you're going to execute, and the method names pretty much tell you, in many cases, you know what they do, and you can have fun using them. But you really won't need to use many of them. Okay, similarly, you might want to go and display a line that we created before as a line display. Okay, and we saw with point that the word point, if it appears in the class, or if you have an annotation, you can go and tell object editor you're trying to do a point, and then looks for x and y properties. In the case of line, same kind of thing. If you go and tell it that it's got if it has the word line somewhere in its interface or class name, or if you have an annotation, it'll say it's a line. A line has an x and y, and the x and y would be which point on the line? So which will be the start point? There are 2 points here. Which should we call the start point? And there's a convention typically. Upper left. Upper left is the one that. So we basically draw a box. Think of a box and say that there's a bounding box, and the upper left is the x and y. And then if you have a width and height property, then that's the width and height of the box. Okay. Again, you can imagine 2 different points. There are many representations possible. You're welcome to have in your interface other properties also. You can have both upper left, lower right, center point, okay, any point you can have there. But as long as you have these 4 properties, object editor knows it's a line and it'll display it. Okay, so that's what we're saying here, x, y, bounding rectangle. And again, you can use the tree view to see the properties of the point. Again, you can tooltip, you can do the tooltip text also. And I don't have that here, but you can actually hover over the object to see its values. Okay, questions? Okay, and then we can go and say rectangle, same kind of rules. In fact, line, rectangle, and oval have the same rules. They all describe a bounding box. Okay, and this is the bounding box of the line, this is the bounding box of the oval, and the rectangle is its bounding box. And you just have a different names and different annotations for these. So, and again, you can have other properties, like you can have a color property or a filled property, which is something you can have just for your own sake. But these 2 properties are actually used by object editor to decide whether you should color the rectangle or you should fill the rectangle or oval. So if you want to have just fun displaying things in a certain way, you can put these properties in. Okay? But from your assignment's point of view, you will just need to create these required properties, and that will allow you to create the various shapes. Okay? So I can take this particular line, and if I want an oval or logical representation, I just change the word line to oval, it becomes an oval. Change it to rectangle, it becomes a rectangle. Okay? If I'm not using annotations. If I'm using annotations, I go and I just change the annotation. Okay. So you questions? I'm going over this real quickly because there's no concept here, it's just roots. Okay?
So what's creating the object editor?
Object editor, I say object editor.edit, right?
Right.
So object editor must be what? Class or instance? Class. It's a class that exists in your system by magic. Somebody labored over it and wrote it down.
Okay.
And who was that somebody? Somebody else, not you.
So we're not really worried about creating the object editor.
No. Okay, but if you, after this class, want to do some research and want to improve it, you're welcome. Talk to me. Okay. There was a research student of mine a long time ago who created Object Editor to create our research user interfaces. It was just too painful to create demo interfaces. So I had the student do it, and then after that I started teaching CS1 and CS2, and I had this eureka moment. Hey, wait a minute, if it's painful for me to create user interfaces, how painful is it for the students to create the user interfaces? So couldn't I also go and extend? And so that tool was very rough. This tool is also rough. It's not very rough, it's rough. And but basically I started using for teaching. Okay, so you don't have to create it; it's all created for you. You have to go and invoke a method in it. Okay. Okay, so we can do points, lines, rectangles, ovals.
Since you have servers, because you can build object editor and show like box where you can enter the values.
So could it give you, can you go and, does it give you boxes to enter values? In the tree view, you can edit the value. Okay? Plus there's a way, if you really want to know how to do it, send me mail, to just create the box. You just say, I think text edit. You say object editor.text edit a line, and it'll give you just the BMI-like user interface. But that's not very interesting because you really want to display it. So in the tree view, if you go and edit the the width and height, and X and Y, and you hit return, the point will move. Other questions? Okay. We can do lines, rectangles, ovals. What else do we want to display on the screen based on the project you saw on the first day? Images. Anything else? Text, the whole dialogue, right? That's the whole point of that. Okay? So how might you, let's again think, what would be the rules for a string shape? We need to have some annotation. Okay? Plus, do we need a coordinate X and Y? Do we need width and height? Yes? So supposing I have the string hello world. What would you give as the width and height? You'll have to go and try out various values, right? Wouldn't it be nice if the system automatically determines how much the width and height, what the width and height are based on the string? Okay? Similarly, for an image, you need X and Y. What else do you need? So X and Y, location. Rotation, wow. Yeah, rotation. If that's your research project for next semester. What else? Minimum information you need. How does it know what image to show? How many of you have dealt with images in programs? So what do you guys do? The images are stored in? So maybe you need to give it a file name. And do we need width and height? So if I give you a Holy Grail image, do you know how big the image width and height would be? So wouldn't it be nice if it just automatically finds those values? Okay. So for string, you need an X and Y. You need a text property to say what you are going to display. Sorry, I put this all yesterday. Forget the height right now. I'll tell you why the height comes in later. And image file name, you need an X and Y. Okay? And and object editor will go in, not object editor, actually Java, it uses some Java capabilities. It will automatically find out how much space is needed to just show a string and an image. But if you still insist and give a height and weight, what should it do? It's going to calculate it for you, but if you insist and give it, what should it do for text? Sorry? Resize it or crop it. There are two options possible. It crops it. Okay? So I've been building some animation user interfaces where I show the string gradually increasing in size. So I've used cropping for that. Okay? For images, what would you want? Either crop or resize, it resizes. Okay? So if you get a big image, you don't have to go to some tool to go and resize it. Actually, I recommend you do resize it because I use some Java capability to do this and they're not very good. So the resized image is not very good. But it will resize the image to the size you want. So if you're trying to make the head of Arthur and you got a very big image, you can go and give it a smaller size and it'll compress it to that size, but it won't look very good. So it's better for you to actually do it manually by using some sophisticated tool. Okay? So, and you can give things like font size and font, that these are optional properties. Again, you don't need to use them, but if you do, you can display them. Object editor does understand these two properties for text. Okay? Questions? Again, these are details, not very important conceptually, but you need to have some rules. Okay, so you see that here? I have a string shape. Which I've defined. I've gone and said structure pattern names dot string pattern, and I say string shape implements string shape, which I'm just being good. I've got an interface. I've got the word string in it. I don't need to because I've gone and said string pattern. Okay, and it goes. You go and say hello 00, and it goes and shows hello at the upper coordinates. Upper left corner of the bounding box is the coordinate, and you've got your two properties, X and Y, and you've got your text property. Okay, so this is how you create a text shape to be displayed. You see object editor.edit hello, and it'll show you this at the right place. Okay, and here's your image pattern. I'm saying image. I've got a get image file method which returns the image file. This file I'm passing here, and you go and give the coordinates, and it'll go and show you that image at that place. Okay, so pretty much follows from what I said earlier. You just see the whole class here. Okay, so creating these atomic shapes is not going to be challenging. Okay. Questions?
The get image file name, is that something you have in another class, or is it just something?
So get image file name is something you have in a shape image, right? You created an instance of a shape image, and you went and passed to the constructor the file name and the coordinates, and you told object editor, please edit this particular image object. Okay? Object editor goes and says, aha, you have an image. So let me go and find out what your image file is. It goes and calls that method, which returns the file shuttle.to.jpg, and it goes and it has the file name, it has the coordinates, it's got everything it needs to go and display. Okay, did I answer your question?
Did you already create image shape interface? There is a shape image shape.
Yeah, so I've got the interface which I'm not showing you, but remember, good practice means that every class must have at least one interface. That interface is just all the public methods here. Okay. Even if you don't have the interface, object editor will display it for you. Okay, yeah.
Where is shuttle2.jpg?
Good question. So this is a file. Where in the directory is it? So what do you guys think? When you're running Eclipse, you've got how many directories, folders? You've got the project folder. In the project folder, you've got an SRC folder, and you've got a bin folder, and in some IDEs, it's an out folder. So is it in the project folder, SRC folder, bin folder, or some other folder? Okay, so 4 choices. Which do you think? Project? It's in the project folder. Okay, that's a good question. So that's your directory. Okay, if you're running it from the command line, it becomes a little tricky. Then it should be in the bin folder. Okay, but if you're running it from Eclipse, it's in the project, in that folder. Okay, other questions? I do have that. Okay. And we don't have any, we can use a long name starting with a slash, which we can give the exact folder name. But when we use these short names, that's when things become confusing. Okay. That's when you have to say which folder should I look, because that's a relative name. And a relative name you need a folder relative to which the name should be interpreted. And that's, okay. As it turns out, Object Editor is to accommodate both kinds of situations. Object Editor will also allow you to have the file in the bin folder. But if you put it in the bin folder, Eclipse will clean up the file every now and then. Every time it rebuilds, it goes and deletes everything in your bin folder and recreates it. So, but just to allow you to run it from the command line, I also look for files in the bin folder. Okay. How many of you are not using Eclipse? 3 people. Okay, so I think it will work, but as long as using an IDE, it should be in that IDE folder, project folder. Okay. How many of you in your previous classes have drawn graphics on the screen using Java? Okay, lots of you. So, Object Editor lets you draw a line. You guys have drawn lines before. What do you think is the difference between what you're seeing here and what you've done there? Yeah. You're not?
What we're doing here is you've given us the object editor using that. One example, you use the public static graphics.
Oh, you use some graphics library? Okay. No, sorry. So that's some 110 specific, that's the project specific kind of thing. This is a general tool. But what about, how many of you used Swing and, so Swing and AWT to use? So what's the difference between Swing and this? Conceptually, which is easier and why? So when you drew lines in Swing, you took some existing code from somewhere and just morphed it to draw your lines? Or do you guys remember what the steps you took? So if I wanted, yeah.
You had to create a paint component inside of the panel that was inside the frame.
Okay, you had to create this hierarchy of thing, and what else did you have to do?
And then you have to call a draw line method for that.
Okay, and that paint drawline method was called on what kind of object? Putting you on the spot here. Yeah, so there's a paint component. Inside the paint component is a graphics object that you get, and that happens to be, then the paint component is a subclass of another class. Okay, so how many things do you have to know there? The graphics object, the subclass, subclassing concept, and so forth. And so this is, you need to know panels, paints, events, inheritance, a lot of things. And this is just going and making this is not orthogonal to that. Later, if we have enough time, we'll actually have you use Swing and AWT to draw the line yourself. Okay? And there's a notion of the semantics, what you're drawing and how you're drawing it. And here you're just describing what you're doing. How is all delegated to Object Editor. Object Editor does all of those steps that I talked about. And you can do the steps yourself also. Okay? So, so basically there's this, maybe you don't really understand this completely right now, but just intuitively, there's a notion of what the semantics are and how they're displayed. you don't even specify here how you display it. This could be displayed as text boxes, it could be displayed as a line, as a tree view, and we just separate these two things out, and it so happens that Object Editor does all of those views automatically. Okay? So I'm just going to go with, I'm not going to look at this stuff here. I'm not going to read this again. When you guys study, when you have to follow rules, it's slow to go and listen to the recordings. So I do put a lot of text in my slides, and that you can read much quicker. But, and so this is just basically saying all the things that I have said earlier, but you get the stuff. And let me just keep going to find something that I haven't talked about. So when you guys create these shapes, I will require you to put all these annotations. Okay? And otherwise, Object Editor will scream. Okay? And we don't want you to make Object Editor scream.